Greg asked me just to reflect a little bit about what's happened within the institution that I've spent most of my life, which is the press. In Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media, published in 1988, Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky exposed the techniques that the commercial media use to promote and defend the economic and political agendas of the ruling elite. Manufacturing Consent, however, was published on the eve of three revolutions: the news industry, the rise of right of 24-hour cable news stations, and the creation of internet of corporations that control the distribution of news and information and mine our personal data on behalf of advertisers, political campaigns. The sins of the old media, bad though they were, are nothing generated even further into a species of entertainment, a purveyor of gossip, conspiracy theories, ominously a purveyor of hate. The new media still manufactures consent, but it does so by setting group against group, a consumer version of what George Orwell in his novel 1984 called the 2 minutes of hate. Our opinions and prejudices are skillfully catered to and reinforced with the aid of a detailed digital analysis of our proclivities and habits, and then sold back to us. The result, Matt Taibbi writes, is packaged anger just for you. The public is increasingly unable to speak across the shrill, manufactured divide. It is mesmerized by the fake dissent of the culture wars and competing conspiracy theories peddled to us as news. Politics under the assault has atrophied into a tawdry reality show centered on political personalities. Civic discourse is defined by invective and insults. Corporate power and the crimes of empire, meanwhile, are left unexamined and unchallenged. The result is political impotence among the populace. The moral swamp is not only a fertile ground for demagogues such as Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, creatures of this media burlesque, but channels misplaced rage, intolerance, and animosity toward those defined as internal enemies. This marketing strategy fosters addictive and aggressive behavior. The more the habits of readers and viewers are tracked, analyzed, and converted into algorithms, the more the addiction and aggression are fed. Richard Rorty, in his book, Achieving Our Country, leftist thought of the 20th century writes that when our breakdown begins, and I'm quoting him, the gains made in the past 40 years by black and brown Americans and by homosexuals will be wiped out. Jocular contempt for women will come back into fashion. The words nigger and kike will one day be heard in the workplace. All the sadism which the academic left tried to make unacceptable to its students will come flooding back. All the resentment which badly educated Americans feel about having their manners dictated to them by college graduates will find an outlet. He wrote this in 1995. The new template for news, Taibbi correctly points out, is professional wrestling. It is a simplified morality play. Politics is reduced to personalities. There is a good guy known to wrestling fans as the baby face, and the bad guy who is known as the heel. It is the heel, whether you see the heel as Donald Trump, Jeremy Corbyn, or Nigel Farage, or Boris Johnson, who keeps viewers coming back. Viewers become addicted to the jolt of anger delivered to them daily. As with any addiction, there is a diminishing return. The rhetoric has to become more vituperative to keep people returning for more hits. Condemning the heel as an anti-Semite, a socialist, incompetent, corrupt, a demagogue, or an authoritarian begins to lose its emotional punch. Soon the heel becomes Hitler or Stalin, or, if you are the right-wing American pundit, Glenn Beck, Hitler and Stalin. The shaping of the public into antagonistic tribes works commercially. It works politically, but it is a recipe for social disintegration. I watched competing ethnic groups in the former Yugoslavia seize rival mass media outlets and use them to spew vitriol and hate against the ethnic group they demonized. The poisonous images and rhetoric that were pumped out month after month in Yugoslavia led to a savage fratricide. The United States is already unraveling into warring factions. It is plagued by an epidemic of mass shootings, death threats against critics of Trump, including Representative Ilhan Omar, and aborted assassination attempts, including a Trump supporter's mailing of pipe bombs last year to prominent Democrats and CNN, an effort to decapitate the hierarchy of the Democratic Party, as well as terrorize the media outlet that is the party's principal propaganda arm. There were 94 school shootings in the United States last year, in a country where 110 people a day die from gun violence. News is a signal, it is a blip, an alarm that something is happening beyond our small circle of existence. Walter Lippmann noted in his book Public Opinion, journalism does not point us towards truth. There is a vast divide between truth and news. Ethical questions open journalism to the nebulous world of interpretation and philosophy, and for this reason, journalists flee from ethical inquiry like herds of frightened sheep. Those who promote the interests of the power elite, who in essence shun complexity and minimize inconvenient truths, are rewarded and promoted. Those who speak the truth are marginalized and, as with Julian, often persecuted. Friedrich Nietzsche calls this process creative forgetfulness. In September 2006, and we know this only because of Julian, Chelsea Manning, and WikiLeaks, 130 gunship fitted with cannons that circled overhead and rained down high explosive shells. Operation Medusa occurred 20 miles west of Kandahar. It took the lives of 4 Canadian soldiers and involved some 2,000 NATO and Afghan troops. It was one of the largest military operations by ISAF in the Kandahar region. The Western press, dutifully fulfilling its role as propagandists for the war, reveled in the power of the weaponry and ignored the slaughter of the victims. Graham Smith, an embedded reporter for the Toronto Globe and Mail, called the assault and calls being embedded with a Canadian platoon that describes being embedded with a Canadian platoon that called itself the Nomads. The soldiers gave the report, and he proudly attached it to his flak jacket. Quote, "The Nomads took me in and they sort of made me one of them," he said. Journalists like to promote the image of themselves as fierce individualists, but they are, as I saw repeatedly in my 2 decades as a war correspondent in Central America, Africa, the Middle East, and the former Yugoslavia, more often obsequious cheerleaders for war and empire. They venerate and are usually intimidated by politicians, generals, intelligence chiefs, corporate heads, and the hired apologists for the corporate state. The criminals on Wall Street, including the heads of financial firms such as Goldman Sachs, are treated with reverence. Free trade is equated with freedom. Democratic politicians such as Obama, who's assaulted civil liberties, transferred trillions of dollars upward to ruling oligarchs, expanded the drone wars to include targeted assassinations of American citizens, and used the Espionage Act to silence investigative journalism, are hailed as champions of democracy. Deference is paid to democratic processes, liberties, electoral politics, and rights, from due process to privacy that no longer exist. It is a vast game of deception under the cover of a vacuous morality. Those cast aside by corporate capitalism, Noam Chomsky calls them unpeople, here and in our wars overseas, are rendered by them invisible, their suffering ignored, and the crimes committed against them disappeared. If we had a functioning judicial system and an independent press, Julian would have been a witness for the prosecution against the war criminals he helped expose. He would not be wasting away in Belmarsh Prison. The documents he made public would have ensured that those who waged illegal war, tortured, lied to the public, monitored our electronic communications, and ordered the gunning down of unarmed civilians in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Yemen would be held accountable. If we had a functioning judiciary, the hundreds of rapes and murders WikiLeaks and Julian made public would be investigated, and those who carried them out would be apprehended and prosecuted. The officials and generals who lied to us when they said they did not keep a record of civilian dead would be held to account for the 109,032 violent deaths, that's their words, in Iraq, including those of 66,081 civilians. The pilots in the collateral murder video, which showed the helicopter attack on unarmed civilians in Baghdad that left 9 dead, would be court-martialed. The civic, patriotic, and political language we use to describe ourselves remains unchanged. We pay fealty to the same national symbols and iconography. We find our collective identity in the same national myths. But the democratic values we celebrate are an illusion. They do not exist. Our government and judiciary have no real sovereignty. Our press provides diversion, not entertainment. Our organs of internal security keep us domesticated and fearful. Capitalism, as Karl Marx understood, when it emasculates government and removes all constraints, becomes a revolutionary force. And this revolutionary force is plunging us into a state of neo-feudalism, perpetual war, and corporate tyranny. Let us make sure that those who resist and fight back, like Julian, do not become martyrs to a lost cause.